world's your guide. Wednesdays, Sundays, catch the ride. Football hoops, we breaking wide. Stats and facts, truth on high. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Just pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Hit the corner of the field, we strategize. Breaking the game down, no disguise. Play by play, we analyze. Eyewear sharp, we magnify. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Just pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Wednesdays heat, Sundays ignite. We talking legends shining bright. Back and forth, day or night. This the plug, we bring the light. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Cats pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel. Wednesdays heat, Sundays ignite. We talking legends shining bright. Back and forth, day or night. This the plug, we bring the light. SWAT talk where the convo's real. From Texas to Florida, we seal the deal. Cats pull up, the vibes are real. Chopping it up, we spin the wheel.
All right, everybody, what's going on, man? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of Swag Talk. Of course, this is a show we cover the swag inside and out, and I am your tour guide around the swag. See what else coming at you. And today we're gonna just chop it up a little bit, man. I got a little inspiration from a article that I saw in Baton Rouge Advocate this morning. Actually, I saw it this morning, but actually I saw it late last night, but I didn't read it till this morning. About the attractiveness of the Southern football head coaching job. So I decided I would kind of, expound, kind of put my own little spin on it and determine if I think this job is an attractive job or not. I'll give my answer after my thoughts. Um, and we'll go from there. But before we get started, man, y'all make sure y'all hit that like button, hit that subscribe button because we almost at 1,500 subs, man. We like literally like 3 or 4 people away. So if you could hit that and get us over to 1,500, that would be amazing. That's a goal that I've had, and hopefully we can get to 2,000 after that. But we're gonna start with that 1,500 and go from there. Also, don't forget to hit that notification bell to be alerted to when videos drop because we drop lives on Saturdays at the games, and we don't always have it set for a certain time. So if we ever do, when it drops. Also, just whenever videos drop like this one, this unscheduled. So hit that notification bell. You'll be alerted to when this stuff drops. Um, also hit the social, Facebook, Instagram, both Swag Talk, Twitter, Swag Talk 76. Week 13 recap coming at you on Sunday, and then have our week 14 preview next Wednesday. Week 14 recap that Sunday. I probably won't have another video about Southern until after the head coaching job is officially announced. I know there's rumors and stuff swirling, but I'm not touching that stuff till something concrete comes out. So this will be my last Southern coaching job video until most likely after the Bayou Classic. So with that being said, man, let's go ahead and jump into this. I divided this into my pros and cons, and we'll start with we'll lead with love, and we'll start with the pros first. Um, these are all things that I think I think are obviously considered to be good things about Southern football program. Your mileage may vary, and honestly, depending on what side you fall on, you're probably gonna say that Southern ain't an attractive job. Um, and as long as you got a valid reason besides they just ain't, I can rock with that. Um, and some people who probably have Columbia blue and gold shades on are probably gonna say that this is an attractive job. And as long as you can expound on that and not just say it is because it is, and I love Southern, then I'll rock with that. it's all about, it's all, I always say it's all about context, man. It's not just yes and no. It's always about what else, what depth it is to it. So, this is not a blue and gold tinted show. Y'all know me by now. So I try to keep it as 100 as I can. Obviously, I do have bias because I am a Southern fan, graduate, um, lifelong Jaguar. So of course, I'm gonna see things Southern way, but I'm always willing to look at things from other sides and throw darts when I need to. So with that being said, man, we're gonna go ahead and lead with love and throw with the pros. All right, the first pro that I have is one that most people can readily agree, and that's the fan base. Southern has a rabid fan base. Southern has, they have a group that travels. Is not as great as it used to be, but they still travel to certain road games. Uh, and of course, there's a tremendous home atmosphere at Mumford. And when you look at the attendance um, over the last few years, going back to 2021 when FAMU and Bethune joined the SWAC, because to me, the SWAC is like, I view the SWAC like in segments, and you had the 8 team SWAC, pre 1998, and then from not like 98 to 1998 to like what, the spring of 2021, you had the 10 team SWAC, and now it's a 12 team conference. So it's, so many things change, and so with that being, I kind of, whenever I do look back, I kind of frame it in that time frame, because things are different, and plus that's like 4 to 5 years, so that's a good block of time to look at. When you look at the attendance numbers since 2021, in 21 Southern, um, they went 18. They had 1,800 and 1,698 people attendance per game. 2022, 19,844. 2023, 17,465. 2023, excuse me, 17,465. 2024, 1,800. Why do I keep saying, man, y'all, 18,463 people. And then 2025, I'm so skeptical of this number because of the season that we're having. But the number is 22,051 people in 2025. Home season is over, so those are the numbers. At least that's what I was able to gather. I still don't. I still don't believe there was 24,000 people at the game Saturday, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but having that group of people that typically going to always show up, at least to some degree, is always going to be an attractive thing for any coach when you're looking at the job, just at face value. And like I always say, it's kind of like you got to kind of look at things like a blind resume sometimes. So you got to kind of look at it like, we take everything out of it, and we just look at it from the perspective of what it is. And so when you look at it like that, there's not a lot of places in this league. It's only a couple more that meet or exceed what they do, what Southern does attendance wise. And ironic and not ironically, those teams are typically the top teams in the league. Now, attendance doesn't win football games. You know what I'm saying? You can have a loud stadium and still lose. Attendance don't tackle, or else we would have a much better record. But those kind of things do help. They do help when you have a great atmosphere. It helps. Um, a lot of teams do win in spite of. So that's not a make or break. I wouldn't even list that as one of the top. Um, I wouldn't even list it as one of the top pros, other than the fact that it gets kind of looked at by people whenever Southern is discussed. Dis discussed. I'm disgusted. I can't say it right. Um, so that's basically where we stand with that. And so I do think that is a big thing. When you look at some of the events they have, like they do the things that, like the recruiting bash and things, the TJ Reels and stuff like that. It's always packed out. So you have, you have, Baton Rouge is a college town. It has two universities. It's a football city and a football state. So you're gonna have even more numbers when things are going great. And having, certain teams come to your stadium certain years, your numbers are gonna spike. And so, you kind of always want to have that home season where you got your rivals, and of course homecoming. So you're always gonna have that. So that's one of the pros that I have. Um, this one is a pro, but it's also not necessarily anything that's super duper important because you know division championships don't mean a lot. I mean, you have to win your division to get a SWAC championship game. That is the most important thing about winning a division. Other than that, it doesn't really carry a lot of weight. So I'm not gonna sit here and trumpet Southern, constantly going to SWAC championship game and being the Buffalo Bills. But Southern has been a team that, if you look at it, they're typically always in the mix, but they don't have. I guess they don't have what it takes to actually win the big game. So if you go a lot and don't win, how much does that matter? But in this case, I do think it's a pro because other than this debacle of a season, Southern's worst record was 4-7 in 2021. When you go back to their last championship, which was in 2013. So if you go back to then, their worst record, other than this season, which is the worst ever, pretty much, they went 4-7 in 2021. So, and they went 4-7 in 2012 before they won the SWAC championship in 2013. So in 13 they were 8-5, in 14 they were 9-4, in 15 they were 6-5, they were 8-3 in 16, 7-4 in 17, 7-4 in 18, 8-5 in 19, 5-1 in the spring season, um, 4-7 in 2021, 7-5 in 2022, 6-6 in 2023, 8-5 in 2024, and then of course this 1-10, probably going to be 1-11 in 2025. So Southern hasn't had losing seasons. They've been the definition of average. If you want to look at it overall numbers, they've been the definition of average. In conference play, going back to their last championship, this team again this season is the outlier. They haven't finished worse than third since 2013. So they're always in the hunt for the division. They win it sometimes. They right there sometimes, but because they haven't won the big game and been to the Celebration Bowl, it looks hollow. And it also, these numbers are kind of skewed because Southern doesn't typically do well out of conference, which is a sticking point to me. But because this is a pro, I'm gonna not really dwell on that. I'll probably circle back to it on the con side. But right now on the pro side, this is a team that, typically wins no less than 6 games a year, other than this year and 2021. So that is a positive. That means that if you can get the team going, you're gonna have success to some degree because it's been done, and it's been done by multiple coaches. In that span, there's been 4 coaches in that span from 2023 from 2013 to now, and 3 out of the 4 have gone to the SWAC championship game at least once. So it is possible. You're in a good position um, to do that multiple years. So that's always a plus. I think the key is getting over the hump, which, like I said, I think we'll circle back to that one when we get to our cons. The next pro is a broader one, um, and it may not mean as much now because of the transfer portal, but Louisiana is a state that has a rich football history, is solid in football talent. Max Preps ranked Louisiana number 7 out of the 50 states in terms of uh, high school football, and that's looking at producing pros. There's been over 6,500 NFL players coming from the state of Louisiana. I mean, there's been over 1,000 NFL players from the state of Louisiana, 12 Hall of Famers, 96 All Pro First Team selections, 327 Pro Bowl selections, 1,935 full-time starters. And so, those numbers don't really mean a lot in this day and age to Southern per se, but it says that the talent is there. Obviously, with you know five five D1 schools and what is five FCS schools, I believe. There's a lot of hands in there for in a smaller state for that talent, not counting other people that come into New Orleans and Baton Rouge and get people, but the talent is there. And when you look at the Max Preps high school top 25 for the state of Louisiana, 18 of the top 25 teams are within 90 minutes of Baton Rouge. So you don't necessarily have to go far to get talent. And when you look at that, that's counting, that includes 3 or 4 teams that win state championships uh any given year. So and that includes 2 or 3 in Baton Rouge alone. Um, so the talent is there. The talent is there, and that's a big pro for a coach who wants to go out and get it. And obviously, with the transfer portal, recruiting has changed a little bit. High school is not necessarily the top way to get your guys, but I still think you need to recruit high school to develop the depth on your team and use the portal to kind of find those guys to fill those key holes or to find that difference maker when you need that at certain positions. So having the talent around you um, is always a big thing. I mean, you got within 20 minutes of Southern, you got 3 or 4 teams that are consistent, deep playoff run teams, and you've gotten guys from those schools over the years to come to Southern, so it's not necessarily a closed door to any of those schools. So I think a coach coming in knowing that it shows. And I mean, when you look at a guy like Hugh Jackson when he came to Grambling, his first stop was in Baton Rouge. So you have to shake the bushes here, and then you 4 or 5 hours from Houston, you 6 hours or so from Florida, uh, Mississippi right next door, Alabama, you know 3 or 4 hours away. So you are surrounded by talent, and that makes this a good thing. If this was college football 26, you got some great pipelines. You know what I'm saying, to dip in and recruit. So that to me is probably one of the biggest pros that you have. Um, and those are things that I think make this job what it is. And then if you go, like I said, if you go into the history aspect of Southern football, Southern, has been a team that's, won championships. They've won national championships, not so much recently, but when you're looking back in the time, they had a great run in the '90s, and they had great, good teams in the '70s. They had runs in the '60s, '30s, '40s under Coach Mumford. So that is there. Also, that doesn't really carry a lot of weight. Otherwise, Notre Dame will win multiple championships with their history. But it is something to have that you can try it out there. Now, for younger people, that don't really mean a lot because their frame of reference don't go back that far. So you need to have more than that. But those are some of the things I think that makes this job a good job. It makes it an attractive job. Um, and those are all things that are valuable to a program. Um, and now let's jump to the cons. I do have more cons than pros because to me it was easier to figure out what I don't like more than just saying all these great things about 10, 20 years ago. So the first con kind of ties into my first pro, and that's the fan base, and that's the expectations. I don't have a problem with high expectations for your team, especially if your team is always in the mix. I wouldn't expect you to be a fan of a team that's always in the mix to be having expectations of your team finishing third place. I wouldn't be, I wouldn't really look at it right if you felt like this team was less than a 6-win team, which I thought, mostly that's my baseline number. But I don't have a problem with high expectations, but high expectations also come with impatience. And, when you have rivals that are, kind of widening the gap between you and them, that brings a little bit more rush to what's being done. People hang on, people go game by game with Southern. So, if you win, okay, you lose, it's the worst thing in the world. Fire everybody, you know. And when you get into a 2 or 3 game slide, people don't want to see any outcome from it. They continuing to get negative in the mumbles turn into roars, and then when the roars start, you know, the coach catches heat. So that's something that I think could probably, some guys as a coach may not want to deal with that. They may not be able to deal with that. I mean, you look at again, you look at LSU. You bring in a guy like Brian Kelly. He for his first press conference, he got into it with the in his first post game conference. He got into it with the media for being late. That's something that you don't. They were like, when you win, we show up on time. That's how Baton Rouge is. So that's something that I think you have to be able to handle. You got to be able to handle, you know, the pressure, the attention. You got to be able to handle all that stuff. You got to be able to carry yourself well at the mic. And some coaches that's not their thing, and that's fine. That don't make you no less of a coach because you can't smooth with people. But you have even a guy like Pete Richardson, who is a quiet guy by nature. He had to learn how to kind of get out there and glad hand a little bit. That never was his thing, but he had to adapt to that. And winning helps. Winning helps that. But having that having that expectation and now skepticism and negativity from a horrible season is something that a new coach is going to have to come in and fix. And nowadays the pressure. Nowadays, everybody always say football, sports, or whatever you done for me lately. But it's even worse now because people just look at it like, well, if you go dip in the portal, you can get 8 guys that's gonna turn your team from also ran to a championship team. It don't always work because guys in the portal don't always pan out. You don't always get a Trey Holly out the portal. You get guys, sometimes who you see why they was in the portal. So if you go too heavy with that and these guys don't work out, then you kind of in the same boat. So that being the case, and having a long losing streak to one of your top rivals, that's gonna always put extra pressure on your fan base. Of course, you got people who only care about winning the Bayou Classic, only care about winning homecoming. So there's so many different perspectives that you got to kind of juggle. And if you're not really built for that, that could be something that would kind of change your mind on things. And people talk as well. So if you hear what people say about Southern outside of Southern, that could turn you off. And so that's probably one of the biggest cons that I have. And like I said, it's tied into my pro, but it is what it is. Also to go with that, and this one could basically be a part of the previous one. That's the recent turnover in coaches. Coach Odoms left Southern in after the spring of 2021. So since he's left, Southern has had 3 head coaches. Now it's kind of it's kind of disingenuous to say that because one of those 3 guys was an interim guy that they kept for the entire season. So he was a head coach, but he wasn't necessarily a head coach. He was just a placeholder. So of course that guy is not going to be there. But having 2 other guys come in after that, and neither one of them make it to that 3rd year again, that could scare off somebody. Now it could make somebody be like, "Yo, I can handle that." Like like you got the crazy girl. Some dudes think they can. Some dudes think they can work with her. Some women think they can fix a broken man. And some people probably think that they can handle this situation and fix it. So that doesn't. Everybody's not going to shy away from that. Some people are going to gravitate to it. But if you kind of not sure, that could turn you off. I mean, because you're basically saying if you don't win in a year, you basically gone. There is no room for a drop off. So if you come in and you inherit a decent team and you win a championship, you have to expand that the next year. You can't have a drop off. You can't have, a team that you inherited to have a lot of seniors and they leave and now you have to, start a new team. You not honestly allowed for that because people looking at you to get gone in your second year. You make it through your second year. We haven't had, the last two coaches haven't even finished their second year. So that's something that could kind of scare some people off. Um, Obviously, winning fixed that, but that's something that could weigh on somebody. Probably one of the bigger ones is facilities. There's been talk about fixing the weight rooms and all that kind of stuff. Um, hadn't really got anywhere as far as being done, but that's something that's huge. I mean, there's high schools that have better facilities in certain aspects. The stadium itself, Mumford is an older stadium. Um, there's always need for upgrades there. Um, some of it is aesthetics, and that may not affect anything, but for fan experience, new scoreboard, another scoreboard on the other end of the field, a better video board, those kind of things kind of add to the atmosphere. That's not a make or break because I mean, there's teams like Rhode Island winning the CAA with a high school stadium. There's you don't need a great stadium to win football games, but I'm looking at it from a perspective of everything adds together, and fan immersion and fan experience are huge. And sometimes the way certain things are done is kind of tough. The team practices mostly in the stadium. Practice fields aren't bad, but maybe better practice field. Nutrition, training table, stuff like that. Those kind of things can help a team. And Southern doesn't necessarily have a lot of all of that stuff, um, and that could be something that makes the job not look that great, especially if you don't have resources to help with it. If you're a coach that might be a younger coach, you don't really have those kind of connects. You know, you got to try to get it out the mud, and sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. But if you're a guy that got the resources or access to the resources, that could be minimal because you can maybe put yourself in position to get that stuff done. Um, and so again, it's big, but again, facilities other than like the weight room and things like that, that's more of a fan thing. And so, that stuff does tie into it as a whole. But, I think that's something that could always be improved. And then there's, the commitment. Nowadays, with NIL, uh, collectives and things like that, how much commitment is there from the group as a whole? There is money around. How much can everybody else put in, me included. How much can we help out? That's something that that can always be better. I mean, that you can never have enough in that aspect. But is there that commitment to that? Because that's what it's about nowadays. You're not spending FBS money, but guys want to get paid. So you have to be able to have those opportunities for people, or else you have an avenue to provide them. How much is the school actually committed to the football team and the athletic department as a whole? That the previous, whether the current or previous, however you want to put it, Sitting president wasn't necessarily an athletics guy. So if you have somebody in that spot that understands the relationship between athletics and academics, then it makes it a lot easier to navigate certain things, and it makes it a lot easier to get certain things because they understand that you're not taking from the science departments to get this for the football team. It goes hand in hand because that money goes from one to the other. And so if you have um, most teams that that are successful long term, they may not have people who are like huge football people in those spots, but they have people who understand that they go hand in hand. You know, you can have one without the other, obviously, and you could be successful in sports without a great commitment from the academic side. But it makes it a lot easier when the people that call the shots, the big dogs, that they understand what it takes and what needs to be done. And that includes hiring coaches and being able to understand that you're gonna have to, if we can do this and get this, that could help things go along a lot smoother. So when you're not kind of trying to fight with somebody or convince somebody to make something happen and it gets shot down or put on the wayside, it makes a lot of those little things become better. And so, that's what you have. You have a president that trusts the AD, that trusts his coaches. That's a great change. And that's one of the key things in hiring. You need to have somebody that's gonna, understand the understand the idea of what the AD or whoever else wants, and is gonna work with it. Ask questions and just kind of move things further along. So again, like I said, my pros and cons. Oh, let me circle back because I said I was gonna circle back to one where I was talking about Southern basically being a team that is always in the division hunt. Um, I said I was gonna circle back and and look at it as a con too because Southern, again, they don't win a lot of non-conference games. So even years they have great seasons, they're not really winning games out of conference. Um, Obviously this year they played a couple of SWAC teams out of conference. They won one, which is their only win last season. They didn't, they only won one non-conference game against a D2 team. 2023, you know, same thing. They beat us. They lost to two SWAC opponents in the non-conference and beat Lincoln. Um, Also, so that's again no FCS wins. 2022, they beat Florida Memorial and Virginia Lynchburg. Um, so again, I think you got to go back to like 2017 when they beat South Carolina State in the MEAC SWAC Challenge. I think that's the last time Southern's won an FCS non-conference game that wasn't against a SWAC team. So to me, that's something. It's hard to say why, as a whole, but it is, some of it is the approach, from the people in charge of the team. Some of it is the mentality. So if you got a coach that's going to come in and put as much value on those games as you do on the conference games, then you can end up with 8 or 9 wins. And some of it also is scheduling. You scheduling conference games for non-conference games. That kind of limits your non-conference opportunities. You're playing, Lincoln, Virginia Lynchburg, those kind of teams. That also limits that. You know, and of course, you got to play FBS game. That just goes without saying. Well, you don't always have to, but most times you do. So that kind of goes without saying that you'll do that, and that takes away a spot. So I think that's not a huge con, but I wanted to kind of put it on both sides because when you look at when you look at the records, from the last few years. Those wins are mostly conference wins. 8-5. Um, you know, one non-conference win. So they were 7-1 in conference, 1-4 out of conference or whatever, 1-3 out of conference. You know, 6-5, same thing. They finished 5-3 in conference. They won one non-conference game. Six and again, 7-5, couple of non-conference wins, 5-3 in conference, I believe. So when you look at it that way, those numbers are heavily conference based, and it shows kind of a lack of competition outside the league. And even though even though you can't go to the playoffs, I always still feel like you should be able to beat teams, especially teams in your state, when you do play them. I think you do need to beat those guys. Recruiting, just perception and everything. So that's something that can be fixed with a coach, and that doesn't necessarily make the job look bad, but it is one of those perception things that if somebody was to kind of negative recruit against Southern, you can use that. It's like, why you won't go there, bro? They ain't gonna do nothing but win, 4 or 5 conference games. They're not gonna challenge themselves out of conference. They're not gonna win out of conference. They not much but a team that wins the Swag West and go home in December. So those kind of things, can be used against you. So to answer my question after talking for 36 minutes when I really was only planning to talk for like 10, to answer my question, do I think Southern is an attractive job? I'll say, kind of. I know that's. I don't think it is or isn't. I think it's kind of with some leanings to the positive, because there are much worse jobs out there, but there are also much better jobs out there. I think if you willing, I think there are certain things that you have to be able to deal with to take the job. So I think there's certain things that you have to answer within yourself. If you could handle those things, that would make this job be attractive. Now, you're a person that wants all these challenges, then yes, it's a great job for you. And it's also a great job if things are well. You're gonna have people behind you. You're gonna have people travel with the team. You're gonna have, a community that's with you. You're gonna have all of that, when things are going good. So in that aspect, I would lean yes. So like I said, I look at it as a leaning to a yes. Um, Now that's just me. Other people might feel it, might feel it's worse. Some people might feel it's better. I just don't think there's enough either way to just push it all the way that way. And so I kind of rode the fence a little bit, pause. But you know what I'm saying? So it's like I think that it's a job that does have the potential to be great if you willing to work with the challenges that are there. If you can't handle it, then it's a nightmare job. And it's not I can never say Southern is a bad job because there are jobs in this league that are very tough. And I don't think Southern is ever going to be at that rate. And that's not to throw any shade at anybody. That's just a reality. But there's also some really good jobs that I don't think Southern necessarily has made the headway to be in that range. So they're kind of in that, just like the football team, they're kind of in that average range. And so some of it, like I said, some of it is people ideals of Southern. They make things look better than they are, and they also make them look worse than they are. But again, let me wrap this up. Uh, I think it's an okay I think it's an okay opportunity with the potential to be great, and I'll leave it at that. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the Swag Seawell signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.